All right, you're also welcome back to TABE Language M. We are on Strategy 5. We're continuing to work with informational text. This is very much a continuation of some of the things that we talked about in Strategy 4. We're continuing to look at main ideas and how they're supported by details, continuing to draw inferences from those supporting details, crafting objective summaries that help us analyze the explicit information and draw implicit conclusions from the explicit information. So this lesson is very much in the same vein, but we're covering a couple of different areas of analysis. The first one is interpreting visual information that's part of passages, charts, graphs, diagrams, things of that nature. And, in your pre-testing, you have already seen that you'll be asked questions that ask you to interpret data and information on charts, graphs, and other kinds of visual information. Sometimes even photographs or cartoons that may have some relevance to the topic. What I will say is that those are there not just for decoration, not for extra flair on the passage, but if there's a diagram, 9 times out of 10 you're going to be asked a question about that diagram. We see a lot people who take the social studies test and haven't a social studies test in GED and haven't worked enough in interpreting charts and graphs and are not comfortable enough with it, and sometimes even though they know a lot of the information that's on the social studies test, they don't do as well as they had hoped because they haven't spent enough time practicing interpreting charts and graphs. So we're going to start doing that with this lesson. It's a thread that will continue on through the rest of this reading textbook and beyond, for sure. But the other element is how to derive details from a text when a lot of the information is implicit. And what we're going to be asked to do here is to ask questions of the text in our mind. Not that we're interviewing a text and that it can answer our question directly, but it can answer our questions with what's already there. Okay, let me read off what we have. This lesson will be a little bit different because most of it is practice, and most of my explanation will be on the back end of the video. Okay, the purpose of many texts is to provide information about something. Whether a text explains how a camel survives in the desert or how to make a cup of hot cocoa, informational texts give you some kind of information. All informational texts have ideas. It's your job as a reader to be able to understand and explain the ideas. And I should clarify, informational texts for our purposes, they could be entirely fact-based with no opinion, but then sometimes our texts may have opinion in there, even though they're informational in nature. One of the things you'll practice doing later on is reading 2 texts that are on the same topic but take a different side on that topic, and kind of analyzing the similarities and differences between their arguments. Authors use a variety of tools to share their ideas. Sometimes they include photographs or lists. Sometimes they include step-by-step instructions or graphs. Authors often state ideas directly. A horse has 4 hooves. Authors can also explain things in a more indirect way. So it did make reference to sometimes we'll have photographs, or lists, charts. In our first practice reading here, we have a picture or a photograph, maybe it's a diagram of the Hubble telescope. We also have this little sidebar here that's got some bullet points. So when you start reading here in a few minutes, make sure that you're also looking at the visual information. Headings too, this heading, the incredible Hubble. I don't see any other headings in that particular passage, but in the following one you're going to have some headings and lists. These are considered text features as well and can really orient you in the text, tell you what that particular section of the text is about. Sometimes we have helpful lists that break processes down into ingredients or steps. So looking at all those features in the text beyond just reading the passage itself is what you're expected to do, and will help you to analyze it with a lot more accuracy. All right, back up to here. as you read, pay attention to the ideas in the text. And this is what I was mentioning just a minute ago by questioning the text. Think about the how, when, why, what, and where. Ask yourself, what is the text about? What is the general topic? How does the author support his or her ideas? Is it through quotes? Is it through statistics? Is it through a lot of visual information? Have they cited real in-depth studies that support the information? So think about what sort of elements that the writer is bringing in to support the ideas. Okay, how does the author present the information? Is it presented chronologically? If it's a science experiment, it probably will be. You start at the beginning of the process and you go through to the end of the process. But maybe the information is presented as cause and effect, or problem and solution. Here's a problem that's affecting the world or people, and here is a potential solution. Or here is a cause of some particular effect out in the world. How does the author think or feel about the topic? As I said a few minutes ago, just because it's an informational text, it does not mean that there won't be bias or opinion in there. In fact, part of your job might be analyzing that bias or opinion, but still they should be bringing in facts, evidence to support their ideas if it's an informational text. And I was a little disappointed they gave you, all of these words, but only a couple of examples. So, when is an important question too. Certainly if you're reading a historical text or even a scientific text, when it happened. Is it happening in our own time or some period of history? I'm going to digress here for a minute and kind of, follow a side trail. But on the GED social studies test, and even to an extent on the reading test in TABE, you're going to be asked questions about history, particularly American history. That doesn't mean memorize dates. That doesn't mean memorize tons of names and so forth. But what it does mean is have a good idea of the arc of, particularly American history. Like if something is mentioned in a passage, like a year and some historical events, be able to place that according to some other things that happened in history, or sort of a general period of time. Now, I'll switch screens here for a minute and talk about the social studies test just briefly. As I have said in the last couple of lessons, civics is important. It's on the tests. About half of the social studies test is about civics, and that's how American government works, what the role of citizens is within American government, what we should be doing as voters and responsible citizens in a nation and in a democratic system. But it's just, if you see here, U.S. history is about 20% of the test. And that's what I'm talking about, that it would be a real good idea to have just sort of a basic understanding of, American history from its beginnings in the colonial period before there ever was a United States of America, when colonists are coming over, like on the Mayflower and at Jamestown and so forth, all the way up until, kind of recent history, last, 20 years is not covered. But as it says, 2001, the September 11th attacks. You will be exposed to a lot of these things through the content that I'm teaching you. But again, having sort of a visual, timeline in your mind of American history will help you a lot. And I intend to put a timeline here as a resource for you, a little bit better one in more detail than I'm showing here. And some of this other information is about what else is on the social studies test. I'm not going to go through the list, but it comprises things that we're doing actually as we work through reading. So we're actually covering a lot of this, even though we're not talking specifically about social studies. Okay, back to the lesson. Where are events happening? Like where in the world? That matters. Are they happening in the United States or some other country? Maybe a particular state within the U.S. or a region. This first passage you're going to read, it takes place in space, or at least is talking about events that happen in space. So knowing where something happens can be just as important as when. Why does a particular thing happen? If a certain outcome is being discussed in a passage, then asking yourself, like, why is this happening? What are the causes of a particular effect? So, this is just kind of a short and, unfortunately, probably inadequate list of questions. I would recommend as you read through a passage, kind of think of, questions that connect to all 5 of these. The more questions you ask of a text, the better understanding that you'll have of it. Okay, so it's time at this point to pause and do the rest of the work in this lesson. Don't pause just yet, wait for my instruction. But you'll read this passage on the Hubble telescope and answer the questions to go with it. And then there's another passage that's a description of a process, and it's aimed at us as readers. It's teaching us how to do a particular thing, in this case, how to build a fire. So read through all this, answer the questions, and then press play on the video again, and we will be going over them very quickly, or very soon, I should say. All right, welcome back. We will start with the example here, and we're asked to reread paragraph 2 in the Hubble telescope passage. I'm not actually going to do that on video, but this is the second paragraph of the passage. Pay attention to your paragraph numbers. All right, the author gives key details about the Hubble telescope in the paragraph. When it was launched, April 24th, 1990. How it was launched by the Space Shuttle Discovery. Hopefully you have an image in your mind of the Space Shuttle and what it looked like, although if you're younger you may not. People my age certainly do. How fast it travels. 17,000 miles an hour in orbit around the Earth. The author provides the details so the reader can learn more information about the Hubble telescope. The author also gives some key information and text features. So that's kind of the point of what we're doing here. Look at the sidebar. It tells how the Hubble telescope got its name. And we have the description of this scientist, Edwin Hubble, that the telescope was named after. He helped make some of these discoveries, not on his own, but was involved in some important work in discovering things about the universe. The latest telescope that launched last year is the James Webb telescope, named after yet another important astronomer. And if you want to be really impressed, look up some images of the James Webb telescope and look at the splendor of the universe around us. Okay, let's get to the questions. So reread paragraph 4. How does the telescope get power? And it was through solar power. It runs on solar power, collecting energy from the sun with its 25-foot solar panels. I added a little bit of detail there. Actually, I had about the same amount of detail as our example answer. But, if the words didn't quite get you to the full understanding, then we have the photograph here that shows the large 25-foot solar panels extended out in the telescope itself. So, putting information together, from the image and the text gets us all the way to the answer. All right, number 2, based on the passage, what does the author think about the Hubble telescope? Which details from the passage support this idea? And hopefully it's obvious that this author has a real favorable view of the telescope and admires the work that's been done. And in fact, I think it says at one point, that the telescope has produced incredible knowledge, kind of that elevated language. The tone is showing that the author is portraying this as an important advancement in astronomy and in space technology. I see this word voila, it communicates excitement. That's a word from French that means kind of like, there it is. It's awesome, isn't it? So certainly some enthusiasm and admiration, for the telescope and the people that designed and launched it comes through in this passage pretty clearly. Okay, 3, what will eventually happen to the Hubble telescope? Before I answer, so number two was based on an implicit understanding. So, reading those details, the words like voila and incredible knowledge, and knowing that they implied that the author has this favorable view. But number three is an explicit information question. It just is there in the passage. What will eventually happen to the Hubble telescope? It will fall to Earth. Once its orbit decays enough and it loses altitude, it will fall to Earth, and that's described here in the last paragraph, that the systems will break down and it will fall to Earth. So explicit information there. All right, number four. And based on the evidence in the paragraph, what can a reader infer about the designers of Hubble? And it's based on this paragraph itself, where the author talks about how at various times there were missions to upgrade and improve the Hubble telescope in the years after it was launched. And so our answer here is C. They understood that new technology may become available after Hubble was in orbit. They knew this at the beginning, so they designed it in a way that it could be retrieved and upgraded periodically, after launch. And then part A and B, or 5A and B. And again, we're working with a best answer. There could be others that are plausible. Which best describes the Hubble telescope's main purpose. And it's D, to provide information to scientists. It does all of these other things. It is true. It educates students if students look at some of the information. It encourages engineers. It absolutely gives photographs that astronauts can use. But we're looking for the main purpose, the biggest picture idea, and it's to provide information to scientists. Visual, numerical, and so on. And now we have to, in part B, find the detail that best supports our answer. And remember, it was to D, provide information. And it's D again. Hubble's photos have allowed scientists to make millions of observations about our universe. And see, we have this detail that is certainly information being provided to scientists. Millions of different observations, to be exact. All right, that ends the passage about the awesome Hubble telescope, but now we're on to something that may be practical in our daily lives, how to make a campfire. And as I said earlier, pay attention to the text features, the headings, the bullet point lists. Those can help us orient ourselves in the text. We've got a sidebar here, a troubleshooting section, like what to do if things go wrong. Certainly pretty useful. So a really long, detailed explanation of the whole process of building a fire in the woods. The questions, however, were pretty straightforward on this. Number 6, how is a TP fire different from a crossfire? And, don't be like me and be tempted to overthink it. It's just C, the way that you place the material is different. You build it either in a TP shape or a, cross shape, depending on your needs. Question 7, in what order should you perform the steps to put out a fire? And I do want to say on this question, on these questions on sequences, it's legal sometimes to not look at all the answers, and I'll tell you why. Because you can go to the beginning of a particular process or sequence, see what kinds of things are first, and then when you go back to the answers, you're going to see things that are obviously nowhere near first in a process. And, like A is a good example of that. Actually, I'm sorry, A is not a great example of that. Anyway, so I misspoke. A is a good example because we have cover the pit with dirt before letting the wood burn out to ash. So obvious kind of missequencing of the process. The answer here is B, letting the wood burn down to ash, pouring water on the pit, covering it, and leave when you can put your hand over where the fire was. An obvious correct sequencing, even if you don't know the process of building a fire, you can go back up to essentially the end of the passage that talks about putting out a campfire and see that sequence. And then lastly, question 8, how does the author best illustrate the need for campfire safety? And it's B, by explaining how to build a safe campfire. There are no really intense descriptions of, the horrors of a forest fire or anything like that. But it does deliver the message of fire safety by thoroughly talking about how to build a safe fire. And, certainly this section at the end about putting out a campfire in a way that's safe and doesn't leave the chance of forest fire is quite important to the whole thing if we're looking at it through the lens of fire safety. All right, so the takeaways for this lesson are, certainly look at visual information in the passage. It's not just there for fun. It's there to deliver important information. And also, to think about as you answer questions that you may have more than one answer that's plausible or believable. You can have a set of answers that are all true about the passage. They say true things. But be careful and give the question what it's asking for. If it's the best description of a main idea, you're finding just that, the big picture, main idea. If you're asking about, an author's purpose, you're being asked, like, what does the author want to convey or teach with the particular passage? So asking yourself those questions as you go through, the implicit information in passage, as you analyze explicit details to determine implicit main ideas, are an important skill to keep working on and developing as you go forward. And as I've said, main ideas, supporting details, and in their form in literary text, theme and supporting details are, one of the most important foundational skills of the reading test, if not the most important foundational skill. And this actually ends the first unit, so the next thing that you'll be doing is a practice test that covers what we have talked about so far. But just like I've done with the lessons, after you have completed the practice test, I have a video that explains the answers, and we'll review the content while explaining the answers. And please do watch that video because it will be important, just as important as the lessons that we've covered so far in the unit. Okay, so I'll see you next time, and I'm proud of your progress so far.